Commander Jake Tank Morrison was enjoying what passed for coffee on Station Omega when his comm unit started screaming like a wounded space whale. The holographic message that flickered to life made him nearly choke on the bitter synthetic brew. "Greetings, primitive human vessel," the message began, because apparently diplomacy was dead across the galaxy. "You have been selected to represent your species in a formal combat trial." Tank raised an eyebrow. "Selected. Right. Like winning the lottery. Except instead of money, you got a front row seat to your own extinction." 3 hours later, the delegation arrived in a ship that could have doubled as a small moon. Tank watched from the observation deck as it docked, trying to decide if he was more impressed or terrified. The answer was both, with a healthy dose of resignation thrown in for good measure. The aliens that stepped off were exactly what you'd expect from a species that called humans primitive in their opening statement. Tall, silver-skinned, and radiating the kind of smugness usually reserved for people who correct your grammar on social media. Their leader, who introduced himself as High Admiral Vex Tal, had the audacity to bow slightly when he met Tank. "Commander Morrison," Vex Tal said, his voice carrying the tone of someone explaining basic math to a particularly slow child. "We come bearing an opportunity for your species." "An opportunity," Tank repeated flatly. "Let me guess. The opportunity to not get completely annihilated." "Precisely." Vex Tal seemed genuinely pleased that Tank understood. "Your species has been deemed problematic by the Galactic Council. Your expansion into space has been, shall we say, unconventional." Tank thought about humanity's track record so far. They'd accidentally started 2 trade wars, somehow made first contact by crashing into an alien garbage scow, and their most famous diplomat was currently serving time on 3 different planets for what the files diplomatically called cultural misunderstandings. "We're quirky," Tank admitted. "You are chaotic," Vex Tal corrected. "However, the Council believes in fairness. Rather than simply eliminating your species outright, we offer you a chance to prove your worth through honorable combat." Here it comes, Tank thought. 1 human vessel against our task force of 50 ships. If you win, humanity earns a place in the Galactic Federation. If you lose, Vex Tal spread his hands in a gesture that somehow managed to be both apologetic and condescending. "Well, your suffering will be brief." Tank looked out at the alien armada floating in space like a constellation of death. Each ship was roughly 10 times the size of anything humanity had ever built, bristling with weapons that could probably crack a planet in half. 50 of them. "And this is what you call fair?" Tank asked. "Quite generous, actually," Vex Tal replied without a trace of irony. "We could have sent 100 ships. The Council voted on it. This was the compromise." Tank felt a familiar sensation building in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd gotten right before he'd told his drill sergeant that yes, he could absolutely make that impossible shot. The same feeling that had led him to accept every stupid bet, every impossible mission, every time someone had said you can't. It was the feeling of someone who was about to make a very bad decision and enjoy every second of it. "All right," Tank said, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. "When do we start?" "Uth." Vex Tal's expression shifted slightly, as if he hadn't expected Tank to agree so readily. "Tomorrow at 0800 Standard Time. May your death bring honor to your species, Commander." "Thanks," Tank replied. "You're too kind, really." As the delegation filed out, Tank caught his reflection in the observation window. He looked like a man who'd just agreed to fight a hurricane with a water pistol. Perfect. Tank found his crew exactly where he expected them, in the ship's bar, which was really just a storage closet with a jury rigged still, and some chairs that had seen better decades. The UES Defiance wasn't much to look at, even by human standards. She was a mongoose-class frigate, which was military speak for we built this out of spare parts and hope. "So," Tank announced as he walked in, "good news and bad news." Pip Nakamura looked up from whatever she was tinkering with. This time it appeared to be a toaster wired to a plasma torch. "Good news first. I like to ease into my existential dread. The good news is we've been invited to represent all of humanity in a glorious battle that will determine the fate of our species." Luna Crash Rodriguez paused with her drink halfway to her lips. "And the bad news?" "The bad news is we're going to die horribly tomorrow morning," said Bob Jenkins, their communications officer, Didn't even look up from his tablet, he called it. I knew this day would suck. Woke up with that feeling, you know? Like when you step in something wet while wearing socks. Tank had assembled his crew over the past 3 years, and he was pretty sure they were all clinically insane. Pip was a genius engineer who'd been kicked out of every respectable academy for what she called creative interpretation of safety protocols. Her idea of fixing things involved explosives about 60% of the time. Luna had joined the space service after her circus career ended abruptly, something about a triple somersault through a ring of fire that went tragically wrong. She flew like physics was more of a suggestion than a law, which made her either the best pilot in the fleet or the most dangerous. Possibly both. Bob was the most pessimistic human being Tank had ever met. He approached every situation with the absolute certainty that it would end badly, and somehow this made him incredibly good at his job. When you expect everything to go wrong, you plan for everything to go wrong. How bad are we talking? Pip asked, setting down her modified toaster. Scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is slightly inconvenient and 10 is planetary extinction event. Well, Tank said, settling into a chair that immediately tried to collapse under him, 50 alien warships, each about 10 times our size, with technology so advanced they probably have weapons we can't even pronounce. So 11, Luna said cheerfully. I like it. Means we won't have to worry about retirement savings. 50 ships. Bob muttered. Why not just make it an even 100? Really commit to the overkill. Tank pulled up the tactical display on the bar's cracked holoscreen. The Galactic Council's task force looked like a swarm of metallic hornets, each one bristling with enough firepower to level a city. Their own ship looked like a minnow swimming in a school of sharks. The good news, Tank continued, is that they're giving us a fair fight. All 3 crew members stared at him. Commander, Pip said slowly, I've seen your definition of fair fight before. It usually involves a lot of explosions, and someone asking, was that supposed to happen? Look, Tank said, they want to play by galactic combat protocols, rules of engagement, honor codes, all that civilized warfare nonsense. They think they know how humans fight because they've read our military manuals. Luna grinned. But our military manuals are like recipes, they're really more suggestions than actual instructions. Exactly. Tank stood up, feeling that familiar pre-battle excitement building. They expect us to line up, exchange polite weapons fire, and die gracefully when we're outgunned. And instead, Bob asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer and it worried him. Instead, we're going to remind the galaxy why humans don't play fair when it matters. Pip's eyes lit up with an expression that Tank recognized as deeply dangerous. So you're saying I can use the improvised weapons? I'm saying you can use anything that isn't nailed down. And if it is nailed down, use bigger nails. What about flight patterns? Luna asked. Stick to standard evasive maneuvers? Standard maneuvers are for people who want to live predictable lives. Bob sighed heavily. I should probably draft our surrender speech now, shouldn't I? Bob, Tank said, clapping him on the shoulder, if we're going down swinging. And knowing this crew, we'll probably take half their fleet with us. Only half? Pip looked offended. Tank, you wound me. I was aiming for at least 60%. Tank looked around at his crew, a mad scientist, a gravity-defying pilot, and the universe's most pessimistic communications officer. By any reasonable standard, they were absolutely doomed. He'd never felt more confident in his life. The battle commenced at precisely 0800 standard time, because apparently the Galactic Council ran their wars like a particularly violent office job. Tank watched from the bridge as the alien fleet arranged itself in a perfect formation, neat rows of gleaming warships that looked like they'd been polished for a parade. Incoming transmission. Bob announced with all the enthusiasm of someone reading their own obituary. High Admiral Vex Tal appeared on the main screen, looking every bit as smug as the day before. Commander Morrison, are you prepared to begin the trial by combat? Oh, we're ready, Tank replied. Quick question though, are there any actual rules to this thing, or are we just winging it? The galactic combat protocols are quite specific, Vex Tal said, as if he were explaining something to a particularly slow student. Ships will maintain proper formation spacing. Weapons will be charged to standard combat levels. No targeting of life support systems or crew quarters. Victory is achieved through the honorable destruction or surrender of the opposing force. Tank nodded sagely. Right. Honorable destruction. Got it. May the strongest force prevail, Vextal said, and cut the transmission. Well, Tank announced to his crew, you heard the man. Standard combat protocols. Everyone clear on that? Crystal clear, Skipper, Pip replied, her hands already dancing over her jury-rigged weapons console. Standard protocols all the way. Absolutely. Luna agreed from the pilot's seat. They wouldn't dream of doing anything unconventional. Bob just groaned. The opening salvo was everything Tank had expected from a civilized space battle. The alien ships fired in coordinated volleys, their energy beams lighting up space like the galaxy's deadliest fireworks show. The Defiance's shields held for approximately 30 seconds before they started failing in ways that made alarming noises. Shields at 40%, Bob reported, hull integrity holding. But I'm getting reports of coffee spilling in the galley. This is serious. Tank watched as another volley of perfectly aimed shots hammered their position. The aliens were good, better than good. They moved like they'd been drilling these maneuvers for centuries, each ship knowing exactly where the others would be. Their targeting systems precise enough to thread a needle at 1,000 kilometers. It was beautiful, really. Elegant. Efficient. It was also completely predictable. Return fire, Tank ordered. Standard targeting solutions. The Defiance's ancient plasma cannons coughed to life, sending out a barrage that looked pathetic compared to the light show the aliens were putting on. Most of their shots went wide. The few that connected barely scratched the alien ship's shields. Direct hit on their lead cruiser, Pip reported. And by direct hit, I mean we gave them a light show that probably made their gunners laugh. Another enemy volley slammed into them, and this time Tank felt the deck plates vibrate under his feet. The lights flickered, which in his experience was usually the ship's way of saying please reconsider your life choices. Shields at 15%, Bob announced. At this rate, we'll be debris in about 6 minutes. I've already composed a strongly worded complaint letter to file with the afterlife. Tank watched the tactical display as the alien ships maneuvered with textbook precision. Perfect formations, optimal firing solutions, maximum efficiency. They were executing the battle plan exactly as it should be executed according to every military academy in the galaxy, which was their first mistake. You know what? Tank said, settling back in his command chair. I'm getting bored with this whole civilized warfare thing. Sir? Luna asked, though her grin suggested she knew exactly what was coming. Bob, open a channel to all hands. Channel open. And may I just say that it's been an honor serving with you lunatics. Tank keyed the ship-wide comm. Attention crew of the Defiance. As of right now, we are officially done playing by their rules. I repeat, gloves are off, safety protocols are suggestions, and if anyone asks later, we were clearly having a massive life support malfunction that affected our judgment. He could practically hear the alien fleet's collective confusion as the Defiance suddenly broke formation, not in any tactical maneuver they'd recognize, but in what could only be described as a drunken pirouette. Luna, Tank said conversationally, remember that thing you did with the asteroid field back at Kepler Station? The one that made 3 different admirals file incident reports? The thing that technically violated 17 safety regulations and 2 laws of physics? That's the one. Luna's hands moved to the flight controls, and Tank could swear he heard the ship itself take a deep breath. Pip, how many of those improvised surprises do you have ready? All of them, Pip replied with the kind of glee usually reserved for children on Christmas morning. Plus a few I invented this morning while you were talking to the pretty aliens. Bob, start broadcasting. Broadcasting what exactly? Tank grinned. Everything. Every embarrassing human song, every terrible joke, every piece of cultural nonsense we've got. I want them to know exactly what they're dealing with. As the first notes of what sounded like polka music mixed with death metal began broadcasting across all frequencies, Tank watched the alien formation falter slightly. Gentlemen, lady, and assorted misfits, he announced. Let's show them why humans don't do fair fights. The real battle was about to begin. The exact moment everything went sideways literally, in Luna's case, was when Pip launched her first improvised weapon at the alien flagship. Tank had asked what it was, and Pip had replied with the kind of manic grin that usually preceded property damage. "Remember that toaster I was working on yesterday? Well, I may have accidentally turned it into a localized gravity disruptor. Also, it still makes toast." The device hit the alien flagship's shields and did absolutely nothing for exactly 3 seconds. Then reality hiccuped, and suddenly the massive warship was spinning end over end like a very expensive, very deadly pinwheel. "What in the seven hells was that?" came Vex Toll's voice over the con, no longer sounding quite so confident. "A kitchen appliance malfunction," Tank replied innocently. "Happens all the time on human ships. Terrible quality control." Meanwhile, Luna had apparently decided that the traditional concept of up and down in space was more of a guideline than an actual rule. The Defiance was now corkscrewing through the alien formation in a pattern that looked like it had been designed by someone with severe inner ear problems. "Crash, what exactly are you doing?" Tank asked, gripping his chair as the ship performed what could only be described as a barrel roll through a loop-de-loop. "Evasive maneuvers," Luna replied cheerfully, pulling the ship into a turn that definitely violated several laws of inertia. "I learned this one from a drunk pelican back on Earth. The alien ships were trying to target them. But their sophisticated targeting computers had apparently never been programmed to track something that moved like it was having an active seizure. Energy beams were flying everywhere, except where the Defiance actually was. Their targeting systems are having nervous breakdowns," Bob reported, somehow managing to sound pessimistic about their success. "Which means they'll probably switch to area of effect weapons and just blow up everything in this general area of space, including us." "Including us." That's when Bob's psychological warfare campaign really hit its stride. What had started as polka death metal had evolved into something far more sinister, a carefully curated playlist of humanity's most annoying cultural exports. Is that a song about a baby shark?" Pip asked in wonder. "Bob's been saving it for special occasions," Tank explained. "Along with about 12 hours of pop music from the early 2000s and something called the Macarena. The effect on the alien crews was immediate and devastating. Tank could see ships breaking formation as their communication channels filled with complaints about the auditory assault being broadcast across all frequencies. "Sir," came a panicked transmission from one of the alien cruisers. "Request permission to return fire with sonic dampeners." "Negative." Vex Toll's voice crackled back. "Maintain combat protocols. It's just noise." Then Bob switched to his secret weapon, dad jokes. "Why don't aliens ever land at airports?" Bob's voice broadcast across the fleet. "Because then they'd be illegal aliens. Get it? Illegal. Because airports have customs and never mind." Tank watched in fascination as one of the smaller alien ships actually stopped shooting and started drifting aimlessly, as if its crew had given up on life entirely. But Pip wasn't done with her improvised arsenal. Her next creation was something she called a tactical disco ball, which was apparently a sensor scrambler wrapped in mirrors and powered by what looked suspiciously like a car battery. "Pip, please tell me that's not going to explode." "Oh no, it's definitely going to explode," Pip replied happily. "But first, it's going to make their sensors think we're everywhere at once." She launched the device into the middle of the alien formation, where it began spinning and reflecting their own sensor pings back at them in random directions. Suddenly, the aliens' perfect targeting systems thought there were about 50 human ships scattered throughout their formation. The result was predictable. They started shooting at each other. "This is madness," Vex Toll transmitted, his voice tight with frustration. "These are not proper combat tactics." You're right," Tank agreed. "These aren't tactics at all. This is just us being us." Luna chose that moment to demonstrate what she called the Crash Rodriguez special, flying directly at the largest enemy ship, full throttle, until their collision alarm started screaming. Then pulling up at the last possible second, while somehow managing to scrape paint off their hull with the Defiance's landing gear. "Did she just key their spaceship?" Tank asked in disbelief. "I think she carved her initials into it," Bob reported. "Also, they're demanding to speak to our manager." "Tell them our manager is busy," Tank replied. "Pip, what's next in the bag of tricks?" "Well," Pip said, consulting a list that seemed to be written in crayon, "I've got a rubber duck that's been modified with a quantum entanglement matrix, with a set of jumper cables that may or may not open holes in space-time. And something I'm calling the oops button that I'm honestly afraid to test. Tank looked out at the alien fleet, which was now in complete disarray. Half of them were spinning, a quarter were shooting at ghosts, and the rest seemed to be having heated arguments over their communication channels about proper combat etiquette. "Gentlemen," he announced, "I think it's time for the finale." The aliens had no idea what was coming next, neither did Tank. But that had never stopped him before. The final phase of the battle began when Pip accidentally discovered that alien shield technology had one tiny, almost insignificant flaw. It had never been tested against weaponized kitchen utensils traveling at relativistic speeds. "Oops," Pip said, watching as her experimental potato launcher punched a perfect hole through the shields of a heavy cruiser. "I may have forgotten to carry the one in my calculations." "Did you just defeat advanced alien shielding with a potato?" Tank asked. "A modified potato," Pip corrected. "I attached a small fusion reactor to it. For flavor." That's when the aliens made their second critical mistake. They tried to adapt. Vex Tal's voice crackled across the comm, strained but determined. All ships switched to adaptive targeting protocols to compensate for their unconventional maneuvering patterns. It was a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. Their computers began analyzing Luna's flight patterns, trying to predict whether Defiance would be based on where it had been. The problem was that Luna's flying wasn't based on any kind of logic or pattern. It was based on what she called interpretive space ballet and what everyone else called controlled falling with style. "They're trying to predict my moves," Luna reported, pulling the ship into a maneuver that looked like a figure eight having an argument with a pretzel. "Joke's on them. I don't even know what I'm going to do next." Meanwhile, Bob had escalated his psychological warfare to include live commentary on the battle, delivered in the style of a nature documentary. Here we see the majestic Galactic Council fleet in its natural habitat, Bob's voice broadcast across all frequencies. Notice how they cluster together for protection, much like confused space penguins. The alpha male, known as Vex Tal, appears to be having what experts call a complete nervous breakdown. The effect was devastating. Tank could see alien ship commanders abandoning their posts, presumably to find whoever was responsible for their communication systems and demand an explanation for why they were being narrated like a wildlife special. But the real chaos began when Pip unveiled her masterpiece, the oops button. "So," she said, her hand hovering over a big red button that was ominously labeled, "Do not push under any circumstances," "I may have accidentally reverse-engineered some alien technology we captured last month." "What kind of alien technology?" Tank asked, though he was pretty sure he didn't want to know the answer. "Their quantum communication array. You know, the thing they use to coordinate their fleet movements instantly across vast distances." Tank felt a familiar sinking sensation. "Pip, please tell me you didn't." "I turned it into a giant reply all button for the entire Galactic Council communication network." The implications hit Tank like a cargo hauler. "You mean?" "I mean that when I push this button, everything Bob has been broadcasting, every terrible song, every dad joke, every piece of commentary is going to be transmitted simultaneously to every ship, station and communication hub in the Galactic Council's network." Tank looked out at the alien fleet, which was still trying to maintain some semblance of military discipline despite being subjected to an hour of humanity's greatest cultural hits. Then he looked at Bob, who was currently broadcasting a detailed critique of alien fashion choices. "And their main communication hub is on their capital world, right? The one with about 12 billion inhabitants, give or take a billion?" Pip confirmed. Tank thought about 12 billion aliens suddenly being subjected to Baby Shark and Bob's collection of puns about space travel. He thought about the diplomatic consequences of accidentally rickrolling an entire civilization. "Push the button," he said. Pip's grin could have powered a small star. "I was hoping you'd say that." The oops button lived up to its name spectacularly. The moment Pip pressed it, every piece of human cultural chaos they'd been broadcasting suddenly transmitted across the entire Galactic Council network at once. The effect was immediate. The alien fleet stopped shooting entirely as their crews were overwhelmed by simultaneous transmissions of polka music, death metal, Bob's nature commentary, and approximately 47 different versions of Never Gonna Give You Up. But the real chaos was happening on their home worlds. Tank's comm system lit up with incoming transmissions from across the galaxy as various alien civilizations tried to figure out why their communication networks had suddenly been invaded by something called the hamster dance. "Sir." "So," came a panicked voice from what sounded like Galactic Council headquarters. "We're receiving reports of mass confusion across 17 star systems. Citizens are demanding to know why their emergency broadcast system is playing something identified as circus music mixed with air raid sirens." Vex Tal's flagship had stopped trying to fight entirely. The massive ship was just floating in space, while its crew presumably dealt with the fact that their quantum communication array was now stuck playing It's a Small World on an infinite loop. "Infinite loop. Commander Morrison." Vex Tal's voice came across the con, and for the first time he sounded almost defeated. "What have you done?" "We won," Tank replied simply. "Just not the way you expected." Luna chose that moment to perform her final masterpiece, a victory lap around the entire alien fleet, while playing We Are the Champions at maximum volume. The Defiance traced a perfect figure eight around 50 of the galaxy's most advanced warships, none of which were shooting back because their crews were too busy trying to figure out how to stop their computers from auto-translating everything into what their systems had identified as extremely aggressive Earth poetry. "Sir," Bob reported, "I'm receiving surrender requests from 37 different ships. Also, someone wants to know if we have the sheet music for what they're calling the torture song." "Which one?" "Each one. I think they mean Friday by Rebecca Black." Tank looked out at the alien fleet proud, advanced, sophisticated civilizations brought to their knees by humanity's greatest weapon, weaponized cultural confusion. It was beautiful. 3 hours later, Tank found himself in the unusual position of accepting the surrender of a galactic armada while sitting in what was essentially a flying scrap heap, held together by duct tape and human stubbornness. Admiral Vex Tal materialized on the main screen, looking like someone who'd spent the afternoon wrestling with the fundamental nature of reality and lost. His previously pristine uniform was wrinkled, his composure was shot, and Tank was pretty sure he could hear circus music playing in the background of his transmission. "Commander Morrison," Vex Tal began, his voice carrying the weary tone of someone who'd been forced to listen to the Macarena 17 times in a row. "The Galactic Council concedes this engagement." "Concedes?" Tank raised an eyebrow. "That's a funny way to say got thoroughly schooled by a crew of misfits in a ship held together by hope and spare parts. Your tactics were—" Vex Tal paused, clearly struggling to find words that wouldn't violate several diplomatic protocols. "Unprecedented." "Our tactics were human," Tank corrected. "There's a difference." Behind Vex Tal, Tank could see alien crew members frantically working at control panels, presumably trying to stop their systems from playing what sounded like a combination of bagpipes and construction noise that Bob had labeled experimental jazz fusion. "The Council has voted," Vex Tal continued, wincing as a particularly aggressive accordion solo echoed through his bridge. "Humanity will be granted provisional membership in the Galactic Federation." "Provisional?" Pip looked up from her console, where she was apparently inventing new ways to weaponize household items. "After the masterpiece we just performed. There are conditions," Vex Tal said quickly. "First, you must agree to limit your cultural broadcasts to designated channels. Second, Commander Morrison will serve as humanity's official representative to ensure that future diplomatic encounters are conducted with appropriate restraint." Tank grinned. "And third, we would like to formally request that Engineer Nakamura never, under any circumstances, be allowed near our quantum communication networks again." "Hey," Pip protested. "I fixed those networks. Now they're much more entertaining. They're playing Cotton Eye Joe on repeat across 17 star systems," Vex Tal replied flatly. "Our citizens are filing noise complaints against the universe itself." Bob looked up from his communications panel with the first genuinely cheerful expression Tank had seen from him in months. "I'm receiving reports that 3 different alien civilizations have officially banned polka music. I think we're making real progress here." Tank leaned back in his command chair, which immediately tried to collapse again, and surveyed the scene. The most powerful military force in the galaxy was in complete disarray. Their communication systems were stuck playing humanity's greatest hits, And somehow, but against all odds and common sense, his crew of lovable disasters had won. You know what the funny thing is? Tank said conversationally. You all came here expecting a fair fight, eat formations, proper protocols, civilized warfare between advanced species. Yes, Vextol agreed cautiously. But here's the thing about humans, we don't do fair fights. We do whatever it takes to win. And we have fun while we're doing it. You brought 50 ships because you thought that would be overwhelming force against one human vessel. Tank gestured toward his crew, Pip, who was now humming while she worked on something that was definitely not regulation. Luna, who was somehow flying in a holding pattern that looked like a smiley face, and Bob, who had apparently started a betting pool on which alien ship would surrender next. You should have brought 1,000. Vextal's expression suggested he was beginning to understand exactly what the Galactic Council had gotten themselves into by making humanity their problem. Welcome to the galactic community, Commander Morrison, he said with the tone of someone delivering a death sentence. May the universe have mercy on us all. As the transmission ended, Tank looked around at his crew and grinned. Tomorrow, they'd be humanity's official representatives to a galaxy full of aliens who were probably still trying to get Who Let the Dogs Out unstuck from their heads. It was going to be fun. So, Pip said cheerfully, what do we do for an encore? Tank's grin widened. Bob, start a new playlist. I think it's time the galaxy learned about death metal mixed with elevator music. The universe would never be the same, and that was exactly how humans liked it.